Sometimes, the most dangerous mistake is not breaking the law, but believing you already know who deserves your respect. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the Atlanta skyline as another weekday slowly came to life. Traffic filled every lane, coffee shops welcomed their regular customers, and the city settled into the familiar rhythm of another busy morning. For thousands of people, it was simply another commute. For one family waiting inside Memorial Regional Medical Center, every passing minute carried the weight of hope itself. Less than 8 miles away, Dr. Marcus Bennett guided his dark gray sport utility vehicle through the growing traffic with steady hands and a calm expression that revealed almost nothing about the urgency hidden beneath the surface. His phone rested securely in the center console, vibrating every few moments with another call from the hospital's emergency coordination desk. He did not need to answer to understand the message. The operating room was prepared. The surgical team was assembled. A patient had already been transported into preoperative care. Everyone was waiting for him. Marcus glanced briefly at the digital clock glowing softly on the dashboard before returning his attention to the road ahead. Years spent as a trauma surgeon had taught him one lesson above every other. Panic never saved a life. Clear decisions did. That lesson had followed him through countless nights inside brightly lit operating rooms, through storms that delayed ambulances, through city-wide emergencies, and through moments when every heartbeat seemed louder than the monitors surrounding his patients. This morning felt no different. He simply needed to arrive. Several blocks away, Officer Daniel Brooks began his patrol with the confidence that came from nearly 15 years wearing a badge. He believed experience had sharpened his instincts, and those instincts rarely failed him. As traffic flowed through the intersection ahead, his attention settled on Marcus's approaching vehicle. Something about it caught his eye. Without hesitation, Daniel pulled onto the roadway and positioned his patrol car behind the sport utility vehicle. Within seconds, blue emergency lights reflected across Marcus's rearview mirror. Marcus released a slow breath before carefully activating his turn signal and guiding his vehicle onto the shoulder. He never considered ignoring the stop. Cooperation had always been easier than confrontation. The morning air felt warm even before summer had fully arrived, and traffic continued rushing past as Daniel stepped from his patrol car with measured confidence. Marcus lowered his window before the officer reached the driver's door. "Good morning, officer," he said politely. "How can I help you today?" Daniel looked briefly inside the vehicle before meeting Marcus's eyes. "License and registration, please." Marcus handed them over immediately. "Certainly. I also want to let you know that I am on my way to Memorial Regional Medical Center for an emergency surgery. If possible, I would appreciate handling this as quickly as we reasonably can." Daniel accepted the documents but did not acknowledge the explanation. Instead, his eyes moved slowly from the identification card to Marcus and back again. The silence lingered just long enough to feel unusual. Behind them, another stream of vehicles rolled toward downtown while somewhere beyond the city's skyline an operating room remained perfectly prepared, its lights shining brightly, its staff quietly waiting, and a family holding tightly to the belief that the doctor they had been promised would walk through those doors before time slipped beyond anyone's control. Officer Daniel Brooks held the driver's license in his hand longer than necessary, studying it with quiet skepticism before lifting his eyes toward Marcus Bennett once again. The morning traffic continued flowing only a few feet away, yet the shoulder of the highway suddenly felt separated from the rest of the city, as though time itself had slowed. "Doctor," Daniel said evenly, repeating the title printed on the identification card. "That is an important job." Marcus nodded politely. "Yes, sir." "Where exactly are you headed?" Daniel asked. "Memorial Regional Medical Center," Marcus answered without hesitation. "There is an emergency procedure waiting for me." Another vibration echoed softly from the phone resting inside the center console. Marcus glanced toward it for only a fraction of a second before returning his attention to the officer. He made no attempt to reach for it. He understood that respecting the officer's instructions would only make everything easier. Daniel noticed the glance. Expecting an important call? Marcus answered honestly. The hospital has probably been trying to reach me. They know I am on my way. Daniel remained expressionless. Step out of the vehicle for a moment. Marcus complied immediately. He opened the door carefully, stepped onto the shoulder, and closed it behind him without complaint. The warm Georgia air carried the distant sound of another siren somewhere across the city, blending with the constant rhythm of passing traffic. Marcus folded his hands calmly in front of him while Daniel slowly walked around the sport utility vehicle, examining it with deliberate attention. Every passing second seemed louder than the last. Across Atlanta, the atmosphere inside Memorial Regional Medical Center had begun to shift. Operating Room 7 stood fully prepared beneath bright surgical lights. Every instrument rested in perfect order. Every monitor displayed steady information. The anesthesia team had completed its final checks. Nurses quietly reviewed supply trays one more time, not because anything had been forgotten, but because waiting had become the only task left. Dr. Emily Carter stood outside the operating room entrance with a tablet in her hands, checking the schedule even though she already knew it by heart. She looked toward the hallway every few moments, expecting Marcus to appear around the corner with the same calm confidence he carried every day. "Any update?" one of the nurses asked softly. Emily shook her head. "Dr. Bennett has never missed an emergency call. If he is not here yet, something unexpected must have happened." In the nearby family consultation room, relatives waited together in anxious silence. A mother quietly held a small photograph against her chest while another family member stared at the closed operating room doors, hoping each approaching footstep belonged to the surgeon everyone had promised would arrive. Back on the roadside, Daniel returned to Marcus after another careful look around the vehicle. "You seem very calm," he observed. Marcus offered a faint smile. "Being calm is part of my job." Daniel studied him for another long moment, uncertain whether to believe the explanation or continue relying on his own instincts. Another hospital call illuminated the phone inside the vehicle before disappearing unanswered. Marcus never looked toward it this time. His eyes remained focused on the officer standing before him because he understood that arguing would accomplish nothing. Somewhere beyond the skyline, an entire medical team continued waiting for one person, while on the shoulder of an ordinary highway, every minute quietly became more valuable than anyone around them yet realized. Daniel Brooks returned to his patrol car without offering any explanation, leaving Marcus Bennett standing quietly on the shoulder while another wave of morning commuters disappeared toward downtown Atlanta. Marcus resisted the instinct to check the time. He already knew that every passing minute carried a cost that could never be recovered. Instead, he focused on remaining patient. Throughout his career, he had learned that composure often accomplished more than frustration. Inside the patrol vehicle, Daniel studied the information displayed on his computer screen before requesting additional verification through dispatch. The driver's license was valid. The vehicle registration matched. There were no outstanding warrants, no alerts, and no indication that Marcus Bennett had violated anything beyond the reason for the traffic stop itself. Yet Daniel hesitated. Something inside him insisted there was more to the situation than what appeared on the screen. He stepped back outside, documents still in his hand. "You said you are going to Memorial Regional," he said. "Yes, sir," Marcus answered. "The surgical team is expecting me." "What kind of surgery?" Daniel asked. Marcus chose his words carefully. "I cannot discuss a patient's private medical information, but I can tell you it is an emergency." Daniel looked unconvinced. "Convenient. Answer." Marcus lowered his eyes briefly before meeting the officer's gaze once again. "Patient privacy is part of my responsibility. I hope you can understand that." The response was calm, respectful, and without a trace of irritation. Daniel had expected excuses or impatience. Instead, the man standing before him answered every question with remarkable restraint. Across the city, Memorial Regional Medical Center had entered an uneasy silence. Dr. Emily Carter walked into the operating suite, where every member of the surgical team stood ready beside equipment that had already been checked repeatedly. Nobody complained about the delay. They simply continued preparing because that was what professionals did when lives depended on them. Emily quietly approached the charge nurse. "Has anyone reached Dr. Bennett?" she asked. The nurse shook her head. "Emergency coordination has called several times. Every call goes unanswered." Emily frowned, not with frustration but with concern. She had worked beside Marcus for nearly 7 years, and one thing had never changed. If he promised to be somewhere for a patient, he always arrived. In the nearby family waiting room, anxiety continued growing. The patient's mother looked toward the reception desk each time someone walked through the hallway. Every unfamiliar face brought another moment of disappointment before hope quietly returned. A volunteer offered fresh coffee, but she declined with a grateful smile. Her attention never left the hallway leading toward the operating rooms. Back on the roadside, another notification briefly illuminated Marcus's phone through the windshield. The screen displayed 3 missed calls from Memorial Regional before fading dark once more. Marcus did not move toward the vehicle or ask permission to answer. He simply remained where he had been instructed to stand. Daniel noticed that quiet discipline and found it strangely unsettling. The longer the conversation continued, the less Marcus resembled the assumptions Daniel had formed when the stop first began. Yet instead of ending the encounter, Daniel called dispatch one more time, asking them to verify the doctor's employment directly with the hospital. As the request echoed through the radio, neither man realized that somewhere inside Memorial Regional, an entire operating room was holding its breath, waiting for one person whose absence had already begun to change the course of an ordinary morning. Dispatch acknowledged the request and placed Daniel Brooks on a brief hold while contacting Memorial Regional Medical Center. The radio crackled softly with static before falling silent again, leaving only the distant sound of passing traffic and the steady rhythm of engines moving toward downtown Atlanta. Daniel rested one hand against the roof of his patrol car, watching Marcus Bennett without saying a word. Marcus stood exactly where he had been asked to remain, his posture relaxed despite the invisible weight carried by every passing minute. He had long accepted that some situations could not be controlled. What mattered was how a person responded when control disappeared. Across the city, the atmosphere inside Memorial Regional Medical Center had become noticeably heavier. Operating Room 7 remained fully prepared, but the conversations inside had grown shorter and quieter. Surgical nurses checked sterile trays one more time. The anesthesiologist reviewed vital equipment again even though every indicator already showed that everything was ready. Dr. Emily Carter looked through the observation window before glancing back at the hallway leading toward the emergency entrance. "Still no word?" she asked. A coordinator lowered her phone with a concerned expression. "We have left several messages. No response yet." Emily took a slow breath. Dr. Bennett has never ignored an emergency call. Something is preventing him from getting here. Nearby, the patient's family remained together in the consultation room. The patient's mother quietly clasped her hands while watching the hallway with hopeful eyes. Every time the elevator doors opened, her attention shifted toward the approaching footsteps, only to settle back into silence when another member of the hospital staff walked past. A volunteer offered reassuring words, but everyone understood that reassurance alone could not replace the arrival of the surgeon they had been told to expect. Back on the roadside, Marcus noticed another missed call briefly appear across the display inside his vehicle before the screen dimmed once again. He resisted every instinct to explain further or plead for urgency. Instead, he looked toward Daniel and spoke with the same calm voice he had maintained from the beginning. "Officer, I know you have a responsibility to verify information. I respect that. I only hope we can do it as efficiently as possible because there are people waiting who have no idea why I have not arrived. Daniel studied him carefully. There was no frustration in Marcus's tone, no attempt to pressure him, only quiet sincerity. Before Daniel could answer, the radio suddenly came alive. Dispatch reported that Memorial Regional Medical Center had confirmed Marcus Bennett was employed there and that hospital administration urgently requested immediate contact regarding his delay. Daniel pressed the microphone closer. Can they explain why this situation is so urgent? A brief pause followed before dispatch answered. The hospital states Dr. Bennett is expected for an active emergency procedure. An administrator is requesting to speak with you directly. Daniel lowered the microphone slowly as the significance of those words settled into the morning air. For the first time since initiating the stop, uncertainty replaced confidence. He looked toward Marcus again, and although the surgeon's expression had not changed, Daniel could no longer ignore the possibility that every additional moment spent standing beside that quiet stretch of highway was affecting far more than a routine traffic stop. Daniel Brooks accepted the incoming call and raised the phone to his ear. The voice that greeted him was calm, professional, and unmistakably urgent. Officer, my name is Sarah Whitmore. I am the Chief Medical Administrator at Memorial Regional Medical Center. Dr. Marcus Bennett is scheduled to lead an emergency trauma procedure. Our entire surgical team is waiting for him. Daniel glanced toward Marcus, who remained quietly standing beside his vehicle, his attention fixed on the officer rather than the phone ringing inside his own sport utility vehicle. Can another surgeon perform the operation? Daniel asked, hoping the answer would ease the growing weight in his mind. Sarah answered without hesitation. We have excellent surgeons, but Dr. Bennett is the director of trauma surgery and the physician assigned to this case because of its complexity. We are reviewing every available option, but every additional minute makes our decisions more difficult. Daniel thanked her and ended the call, yet he did not move. The words lingered long after the conversation had ended. Director of Trauma Surgery. Assigned physician. Every available option. None of those phrases sounded dramatic. They sounded real. Across Memorial Regional Medical Center, the tension had quietly spread beyond Operating Room 7. Hospital administrators monitored updates from the Emergency Coordination Office while surgical staff continued preparing for a procedure that everyone hoped could still begin soon. Dr. Emily Carter walked toward the recovery unit before returning once again to the operating suite, unable to remain in one place for very long. She understood that waiting often became the hardest part of emergency medicine because waiting meant precious time continued moving whether anyone was ready or not. Inside the family consultation room, the patient's mother finally stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the parking area. She searched each arriving vehicle with hopeful eyes, believing that one of them might finally bring the surgeon everyone had promised would come. Beside her, another family member quietly whispered words of encouragement, but uncertainty had already settled over the room like a heavy cloud. Back on the roadside, another hospital notification illuminated the screen inside Marcus's vehicle. Emergency coordination. For missed calls. One new message. Marcus never asked permission to retrieve the phone. He simply waited. Daniel noticed that restraint once again. Most people would have become impatient long before now. Marcus had done exactly the opposite. He had answered every question respectfully, followed every instruction, and never once demanded special treatment. Daniel slowly walked toward him. Dr. Bennett, he said, speaking more thoughtfully than before, why did you never tell me you were the director of trauma surgery? Marcus offered a quiet smile that carried neither pride nor disappointment. Because my title was never the important part, he answered. The patient waiting at the hospital is what matters. The simplicity of that answer struck Daniel more deeply than any official confirmation could have. Before either man could continue, another vehicle entered the highway shoulder. It was not another patrol car. The Memorial Regional Medical Center security vehicle stopped several yards behind Daniel's cruiser, followed closely by a dark executive sedan displaying the hospital's official insignia. Several people stepped out quickly, scanning the roadside until they spotted Marcus. Relief immediately appeared across their faces. Without a single word from Marcus himself, the truth had arrived, carried not by arguments or demands, but by the people who knew exactly why every minute of that morning had mattered. Sarah Whitmore hurried toward Marcus Bennett with the chief of surgery and the director of emergency services close behind. Neither of them hesitated for even a moment before reaching him. "Dr. Bennett," Sarah said with visible relief, "we have been trying to reach you everywhere." Marcus offered a calm nod. "I know. I could not answer while I was cooperating with the traffic stop." The chief of surgery stepped forward immediately. "The operating room is fully prepared. The team is still waiting. We can leave as soon as you are ready." Daniel Brooks stood silently beside his patrol vehicle, watching the exchange unfold. No one questioned Marcus's identity. No one asked him to prove where he worked. Every member of the hospital leadership greeted him with the quiet confidence reserved for someone whose reputation had already been earned through years of dedication. The director of emergency services turned politely toward Daniel. "Officer, thank you for taking the time to verify Dr. Bennett's identity. He serves as our director of trauma surgery and leads our emergency surgical response team. This morning's procedure was assigned specifically to him because of the experience required for the case." Daniel felt the words settle heavily inside him. Throughout the entire encounter, Marcus had never mentioned his title. He had never attempted to use authority to end the stop. He had only spoken about reaching a patient in time. Looking back, Daniel realized that every opportunity to verify the situation had been offered calmly from the very beginning. Marcus had suggested contacting the hospital. He had answered every question honestly. He had followed every instruction without complaint. Yet Daniel had continued trusting assumptions instead of listening. Sarah glanced at her watch before looking back toward Marcus. "We still have a chance if we leave now." Marcus nodded once. "Then let us not waste another minute." He turned toward Daniel before opening the driver's door. There was no anger in his expression, no satisfaction, and no desire to embarrass the officer standing before him. "Thank you for your time, officer," he said quietly. "I hope the rest of your day is safe." Those simple words surprised Daniel more than anything else that had happened that morning. After everything, Marcus chose courtesy instead of resentment. Daniel stepped back instinctively. "Dr. Bennett," he replied, his voice noticeably different than before, "you are free to go." Marcus entered his sport utility vehicle, started the engine, and carefully merged back onto the highway with the hospital vehicles following close behind. The convoy disappeared into the morning traffic, moving steadily toward Memorial Regional Medical Center where an entire surgical team continued waiting with quiet determination. Daniel remained standing beside his patrol car long after the vehicles were gone. The flashing blue lights reflected across the pavement, but they no longer felt reassuring. Instead, they reminded him how easily confidence could become misplaced when assumptions replaced understanding. He replayed every conversation in his mind. Marcus had never asked for special treatment. He had only asked for the opportunity to help someone in desperate need. Daniel slowly removed his patrol cap and looked toward the distant skyline where the hospital stood beyond the rising buildings. For the first time that morning, he understood that the greatest mistake had not been stopping a vehicle. It had been failing to recognize the humanity of the person sitting behind the wheel before deciding who deserved to be believed. The convoy reached Memorial Regional Medical Center only minutes later, and before the vehicles had fully stopped beneath the emergency entrance, nurses, orderlies, and members of the surgical staff were already waiting outside. The moment Marcus Bennett stepped from his sport utility vehicle, every unnecessary conversation disappeared. There was no applause, no dramatic celebration, only the quiet confidence of professionals who finally saw the person they had been hoping would arrive. Marcus greeted them with a brief nod while continuing toward the entrance without breaking stride. "Status?" he asked Dr. Emily Carter as she met him at the doors. Emily handed him the updated chart while walking beside him. "The patient remains stable. The entire team is ready. We have completed every possible preparation." Marcus reviewed the latest information with calm concentration. The delay was behind him now. Nothing could recover those lost minutes. The only responsibility that mattered was the patient waiting beyond the operating room doors. As he approached the surgical wing, Marcus slowed for only a brief moment outside the family consultation room. Through the glass he saw anxious faces rising from their seats the instant they recognized the white surgical coat approaching. The patient's mother stepped toward him, uncertainty filling her eyes. Marcus offered a reassuring smile that carried quiet confidence rather than false promises. "We are ready to begin," he said gently. "Everyone on this team is focused on giving your loved one the very best care we can provide." Tears gathered in the woman's eyes as she thanked him, and Marcus acknowledged her gratitude with a respectful nod before continuing toward operating room 7. Inside the operating suite, every movement reflected preparation built through years of discipline. Surgical lights illuminated the room with steady brightness. Monitors displayed consistent readings. Instruments rested in perfect order across sterile tables while each member of the team moved with calm precision. Marcus entered without discussing the events that had delayed him. He did not mention the traffic stop. He did not speak about lost time. He simply stepped into the role everyone had been waiting for him to fill. Dr. Emily Carter watched as the atmosphere inside the room changed almost immediately. Nobody became louder or more hurried. Instead, the team became calmer. Marcus reviewed the final checklist, confirmed every detail, and quietly thanked each member of the staff before the procedure began. Years of working together had created an unspoken rhythm that required very few words. Outside the operating room, the family waited through what felt like an endless stretch of time. Every opening elevator door drew hopeful eyes. Every passing physician caused hearts to race before settling once more into anxious silence. Meanwhile, several miles away, Daniel Brooks remained seated inside his patrol vehicle, unable to push the morning from his thoughts. He replayed each conversation again and again, remembering how Marcus had remained respectful through every unnecessary delay. Daniel realized that the surgeon had never once tried to prove he was more important than anyone else. He had only tried to reach someone who desperately needed him. Nearly 3 hours later, the operating room doors finally opened. Marcus removed his surgical cap and walked calmly toward the waiting family. Before he spoke, they searched his face for an answer. Then they saw the quiet smile that appeared before a single word was spoken. Relief swept through the room as Marcus gently explained that the procedure had gone well and that the patient was now receiving excellent postoperative care. Tears became embraces, whispered prayers became grateful smiles, and in that single moment everyone present understood that compassion, preparation, and perseverance had accomplished what panic never could. The days that followed passed quietly inside Memorial Regional Medical Center, yet the events of that morning continued echoing through conversations in conference rooms, nursing stations, and administrative offices. Nobody spoke about them with anger. Instead, they spoke about responsibility, communication, and the importance of understanding the full picture before reaching a conclusion. Hospital leadership completed a detailed timeline of the emergency response, documenting every phone call, every dispatch record, and every minute that had shaped the outcome of the day. The purpose was not to create unnecessary conflict. It was to learn from an experience that had nearly placed an already difficult situation under even greater pressure. At the police department, Daniel Brooks was asked to meet privately with his supervising lieutenant. The conversation remained professional from beginning to end. Reports were reviewed carefully. Dispatch recordings were played back. Questions were asked one at a time. Daniel answered each of them honestly. As he listened to his own words from the body camera recording, he noticed something that had escaped him during the encounter itself. Marcus Bennett had never argued. He had never ignored instructions. He had never raised his voice or demanded special treatment. Every request had been respectful. Every explanation had been calm. Every suggestion had focused on helping the officer verify the situation as efficiently as possible. The realization settled heavily on Daniel's conscience because it forced him to confront something far more uncomfortable than a procedural mistake. He had formed conclusions before giving the other person a genuine opportunity to be heard. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to his normal routine almost immediately. By the next morning he was making hospital rounds before sunrise, checking on recovering patients, encouraging medical residents during training sessions, and thanking nurses for their dedication during the previous day's emergency. When Dr. Emily Carter mentioned that several local news organizations had contacted the hospital asking for interviews, Marcus smiled politely before shaking his head. "The story is not about me," he said. "The story is about a patient who now has another chance to recover. That is where the attention belongs." Emily nodded, although she knew very few people would respond with such humility after everything that had happened. Word of Marcus's response quietly spread throughout the hospital, earning him even greater respect from colleagues who had already admired his professionalism. Several days later, Daniel requested permission to visit Memorial Regional Medical Center while off duty. He arrived wearing ordinary clothes instead of his uniform and walked through the front entrance with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. After asking for directions, he found Marcus speaking with the family of the patient whose surgery had been completed successfully. Daniel waited respectfully until the conversation had ended before approaching. Marcus recognized him immediately and greeted him with the same calm expression he had shown on the roadside. Daniel took a slow breath before speaking. "Dr. Bennett, I have thought about that morning every day since it happened," he said quietly. "I owe you a sincere apology. I allowed my assumptions to become stronger than my willingness to listen." Marcus remained silent for a brief moment before offering a gentle nod. "Recognizing a mistake is never easy," he replied. "Learning from it is what gives the mistake meaning." Daniel lowered his eyes with quiet gratitude. In that peaceful hospital hallway, there were no flashing emergency lights, no radios, and no pressure from passing time. There were simply two men standing face to face, proving that genuine accountability begins not with excuses, but with the courage to accept responsibility and choose a better path forward. Months passed, and the memory of that extraordinary morning slowly became part of two very different lives shaped by the same lesson. At Memorial Regional Medical Center, the patient continued recovering beyond every expectation, taking stronger steps with each passing week while family members never forgot the surgeon who had arrived determined to place another person's future ahead of his own frustration. Marcus Bennett returned to the routine that had always defined him. He greeted nurses before sunrise, mentored young physicians with quiet patience, comforted anxious families with honest words, and approached every operating room with the same calm confidence that had earned the trust of everyone around him. Those who worked beside him often said that his greatest gift was not simply his remarkable skill as a surgeon. It was his ability to make every person feel seen, heard, and respected, even during the most difficult moments of their lives. Across the city, Daniel Brooks discovered that one experience had quietly changed the way he approached every day in uniform. He no longer relied on first impressions before asking questions. He listened longer. He observed more carefully. He reminded younger officers that professionalism was measured not only by enforcing the law but also by respecting the dignity of every person they encountered. His supervisors noticed the difference, but Daniel never spoke publicly about why he had changed. The lesson belonged to him, and he intended to honor it through his actions rather than his words. One Saturday afternoon, nearly 6 months later, the Atlanta Community Partnership hosted a public event celebrating cooperation between hospitals, emergency responders, and neighborhood organizations. Families filled the city park while children explored ambulances, police vehicles, and rescue equipment with wide smiles. Volunteers offered health screenings, first aid demonstrations, and safety workshops that brought people from every background together. Marcus attended with several colleagues from Memorial Regional Medical Center, answering questions from students interested in medicine. Daniel participated with his department, helping children learn about traffic safety and community service. Their paths crossed naturally near a medical demonstration booth. For a brief moment, they simply smiled before shaking hands. There was no awkwardness left between them. Only mutual respect earned through honesty, humility, and growth. A young boy watching nearby tugged gently on his father's sleeve and pointed toward Marcus before looking at Daniel. "They both help people, do not they?" he asked innocently. His father smiled and answered without hesitation. "Yes, son. They just help in different ways." Marcus and Daniel exchanged another quiet glance before looking back at the families gathered around them. Neither man needed to explain what had happened months earlier because the most meaningful lessons rarely require long speeches. They are revealed through the choices people continue making after difficult moments have passed. As the afternoon sun settled lower across the park, laughter replaced sirens, conversations replaced misunderstandings, and strangers became neighbors through simple acts of kindness. The memory of one delayed journey had ultimately become something far greater than regret. It became a reminder that every profession built on public trust carries the same responsibility to see humanity before assumption, character before appearance, and truth before prejudice. Because a badge can stop a vehicle, and a surgeon can save a life, but only compassion has the power to restore the faith that allows an entire community to move forward together.